And virtually all these other platforms, it's almost 99, 98, 97, 96%. When they make a political donation, goes to the left. Again, shows you the kind of people that they are hiring. And you just can't hire people like that by chance. It's got to be a design. It's got to be a focus on people who are left-wing. Otherwise, you can't get that kind of unanimity in terms of how much money they give to the left.
And the same thing extends to what I call the corporate media. You know, back in the day, it used to be that they would have on guests and they would say, this is so-and-so from the intelligence community. That's now changed entirely.
Right.
You know, the corporate media is comprised of the intelligence community. They're no longer even hiding it. They're just literally on the payroll. They're day-to-day guests. They're, you know, part of the establishment. And that's a big sea change, which is very unfortunate in my opinion.
You know, Jeff, I used to be on CNN on a pretty regular basis. I used to be on MSNBC on a pretty regular basis. I was on the Don Lemon Show a few times. All that stopped, I want to say about maybe 3 or 4 years ago. They literally stopped asking me, and you rarely see any kind of feisty counterpoint from a conservative on any of those other networks. But Jeff, tell us what a lot of people aren't connecting regarding the Twitter file dumps.
Yeah, I think one of the most important aspects is Michael Schellenberger, who's what I view as what used to be a centrist Democrat,
Right.
You know, is part of this Twitter files dump and has done a great job with it. And what he divulged was this war game scenario this planning that was going on by the Dems in September of 2020. Now, as soon as I read that, that struck an immediate chord because I'd written a paper a long time ago. And it was about somebody named Foley, who he was a Democratic strategist, and he's the originator, James Foley, he's the originator of the blue shift theory. And the blue shift theory basically says that Republicans are going to lead on election day, and in the days that follow election day, that lead is going to slip, and Dems are going to rise up as mail-in ballots come in. So, okay, as a backdrop, James Foley is the originator of the blue shift theory. What he did was he did a war game analysis of the 2020 election, and he did it in December 2019. So 11 months and change before the actual election. And he was incredibly prescient. He predicted everything down to the wire exactly as it was going to happen. Shockingly so. Now, what seems apparent from these latest Twitter releases is that Dems very much took his warnings to heart. And they began a second series of war game analysis. And this began in June 2020. And they did a second series in August 2020. And then they had a third kind of tip of the spear analysis in September 2020, which was focused entirely on the potential leak of the Hunter Biden laptop. And what's really interesting about this whole process is Foley was right in December 2019, but he was only right with the benefit of hindsight. If the DNC had done nothing, if they had ignored his predictions, and they hadn't made unconstitutional changes to state election laws in key states, if they hadn't done an unprecedented number of mail-in ballots, if they hadn't done all of these things, Foley's prediction never would have come true. The election wouldn't have been close.
We literally are the board of directors of the largest financial entity in the world.
While Senator Mike Lee criticized the system of putting a must-pass spending bill thousands of pages long and full of earmarks right next to a scheduled recess like Christmas.
That is designed by its very nature to carry out this extortive threat. You either vote for this or you're voting to shut down the government.
The earmarks in this spending bill include $45 billion in funding for Ukraine, hundreds of millions of dollars in funding for border protection in other countries like Egypt and Tunisia, over $3.5 million for a Michelle Obama trail in Georgia, around $3 million for a half dozen LGBT-related projects and programs, $4 million for an animal genetic engineering center in Missouri, $2 million for green job workforce development and equipment in Collegeville, Pennsylvania, and $1 million for career skills and job counseling at a women's center in Kew Gardens. After a decades-long ban, Democrats revived the use of earmarks ahead of fiscal year 2022. Senator Ron Johnson called earmarks a gateway drug to massive deficit spending.
So again, we're on the side of fiscal sanity. We're on the side of a process that is transparent so that members and the American public actually understand how the federal government is mortgaging their kids' futures.
Meanwhile, President Biden hailed the omnibus bill's passage and vowed to sign it into law. He called it great news for our economy, capping off a year of historic bipartisan progress for the American people. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Going to pursue these kind of agenda items, and that'll make a big difference. But we will still have Davos. You know, woke capitalism is a little strange. It's not, in some sense, it's just a marketing ploy. Like, you know, the Business Roundtable came out with this statement on stakeholder capitalism. We weren't going to focus on investors. Now we're going to focus on these stakeholders. Well, the stakeholders were customers, employees, suppliers, and community. What idiot CEO doesn't focus on his customers? I mean, you have to be a buffoon. How else are you going to make a profit? And of course you focus on your employees. If you're a CEO, they're your most important asset. So you obviously are going to focus on them. If you don't focus on your suppliers, they're going to supply your competitors, and you're going to be out of business, particularly during a pandemic. And everybody knows you have to be liked in the community to be successful. So all they were really saying was, we're going to do the things. We're not going to focus on returns for investors. We're going to focus on the things that generate returns for investors, which I thought was baloney. Then you've got woke capitalism kind of as a marketing tool. Like when Nike uses Colin Kaepernick in an ad, you know, and he's saying things about that some people might consider unpatriotic. Well, they're not doing that because they're woke. They're doing that because they're appealing to a target market. There's young people. They're appealing to a market that will find that appealing. Just like when Chick-fil-A, when they're out there, you know, they're very open about their religious beliefs. Well, that's an appeal to a target market. So I don't object to Nike trying to appeal to a particular target market, or really any other brand making that kind of decision. What I object to are these large financial firms forcing corporations to do things that are not in their best interest, are not designed to create a profit. For example, when BlackRock and Vanguard voted with an environmentalist hedge fund, this little bitty hedge fund, wanted to put environmentalists on Exxon's board of directors. And one of the guy who started the hedge fund was from BlackRock. BlackRock and Vanguard supported him, and guess what? Now there's environmentalists on ExxonMobil's board of directors. Well, nobody can rationally think that that's going to improve the profitability of an oil company at a time when oil is shooting through the roof. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So that's not marketing. That's oppression. That's socialist. That's elites deciding what we should and shouldn't do. And this Davos crew is all over this. Brian Moynihan, Klaus Schwab, Larry Fink. These people are not representing your best interest. They're representing their best interest, as demonstrated by the fact that they fly to these events in these huge carbon-emitting planes, or they take these yachts that emit all of this carbon, and then they talk about how the rest of us should turn off our heat or turn down our air conditioning like they're doing in California. So this is not in our interest. This is in their interest.
Well, and that brings up the other point, too. I assume that you've been around these circles and you met some of them. Like, do they actually believe in this stuff? Like, do they actually care about this environment stuff? Or do you see it as more just like this? I mean, I assume it's not profit either, because it's not as profitable. What's this really about?
Well, it's not going to hurt BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard's profit. I mean, they get profits from investing funds. Eventually, if it was shown that how deleterious investing based on politics is, that'll hurt them. And that's what's starting to happen now. You're starting to see this backlash against it. Some of them are believers. I think some of them are believers. Some of them are just have bought into that. I don't think they call themselves socialists, but they bought into this notion that they know how to run our lives better than we do. Like, they see these problems and they know how to solve these problems for us. Well, guess what? I'm a big fan of Adam Smith's Invisible Hand. Millions of people making these kind of decisions every day with every dollar they spend. That's where you get the best results, which is why the United States has been around as long as it has. Within the first 100 years of our history, we went from 13 backwoods colonies to the largest economy in the world by 1885. I mean, an economic miracle. And we've been the largest economy ever since. And that's because our economy was based on the invisible hand. It's based on the people. a representative democracy and an economy where they vote with every dollar they spend as to how the economy is directed. These elites seeing problems and deciding they're going to fix them for us, that's how you end up with poverty and want, as opposed to prosperity and abundance.
Locations are strategic, where you have to hold, where the deep water ports are, and they're trying to emplace in those Japanese and American locations through political warfare what was bought in blood by the Americans during the liberation of the region. China got them just by buying off the right people. At that 80th commemoration of the Battle of Guadalcanal, the America sent, for example, the daughter of John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy was his boat sank, was torpedoed during the battle, and his life was saved by 2 Solomon Islanders. And so his daughter, who's now ambassador to Australia, came up for the commemoration. The Prime Minister of the Solomon Islands wasn't there because he's so deep in China's pocket that he didn't want to give any importance to this liberation from the last Asian authoritarian imperialist power. And they switched in 2019 from Taiwan to China. In the intervening time, there were riots. Then they signed a security agreement between the Solomons and the PRC that allows the deployment of Chinese military personnel to protect Chinese citizens and assets in the Solomon Islands at the request of the Solomons government, or permission of the Solomons, which will be given because this guy's. And the key thing is they bought off 39 of the 50 members of parliament, which was enough to change the constitution to delay elections. This is what happens. Pro-PRC authoritarian leader is setting the groundwork to delay elections, and if there's a civil war because of it, that's fine with him, because his Chinese backers will come in with a military that will keep him in power, and he'll never have another election again.
What I mean is the need to protest. Her teammate, Breonna Turner, echoed Griner's feelings, saying, quote, "It's not played at Walmart. It's not played when you go to Six Flags. Why is it played before sporting events?" Unquote. See, this is where the heart of the matter is when it comes to hating America. Privileged athletes don't understand why the anthem is played at sports events. The reason, my friends, is to unite people, not just behind the sport itself, but the freedom the country affords to be able to play that sport. This goes all the way back to the nation's pastime of baseball. There have been pauses in our national sports due to world wars that we were involved in. We did the same thing after 9/11. The reason we sing is to honor the country for the ability to play the sport, to watch the sport, and not be jailed for 9 years for a petty crime. That's what authoritarian regimes do. So if you can't honor that for 90 seconds, and just so you know, since I've sung this many, many times before, most pro sports teams require the anthem to be sung in 90 seconds. If you can't stand for that, then you're forgetting the soil you're on. That is why it rubs people the wrong way. So when Griner says things like this and then spends 10 months in Russian prison, some are going to be unsympathetic to her cause, because now she's getting a taste of how other countries do things. If she tried that protesting crap in Russia, well, she wouldn't get too far. So now let's talk about this totally lopsided trade. Griner was exchanged for notorious arms dealer Victor Bout. And it's important to know who he is, because the media is going to downplay this. They don't care who he is or what he did. They just care that Griner is back on U.S. soil. Bout was held in a federal prison in Marion, Illinois. He was arrested by the DEA in Thailand back in 2008. He was convicted for conspiring to kill Americans and to serve a 25-year sentence. Let me repeat that. A 25-year sentence for conspiring to kill Americans. Bout was the notorious inspiration for the 2005 Nicolas Cage film, Lord of War. Tom Pasquarello was the DEA agent who helped put Bout behind bars and was aghast at the trade. He said that the U.S. State Department has a responsibility to figure out how to get wrongfully detained Americans back home without a prisoner swap. He told Yahoo News, quote, "I'm kind of in disbelief that someone with the potential to orchestrate arms deals that can kill Americans anywhere in the world would be traded for a prisoner. I think this sends a terrible message that the U.S. will negotiate and that the U.S. will make concessions, and that if an American is held overseas, there's always the potential that the U.S. will acquiesce to the demands of people like Russian President Vladimir Putin. And Banksy helped build a client list that included some of the world's most notorious leaders. He made $50 million supplying the Taliban with military equipment, according to the U.S. Department of Treasury. He also allegedly inflamed conflicts in Liberia, Congo, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, and Sudan. Angola was one country where Bout allegedly defied United Nations sanctions prohibiting arms trafficking and U.S. peacemaking efforts. A former high-ranking U.S. State Department official told Yahoo Sports in May that in the mid to late 1990s, Bout sold Soviet-era arms to both sides of the Angolan Civil War, the Marxist government and the UNITA rebels seeking to overthrow it. Yahoo Sports says that Bout consistently stayed one step ahead of international investigators by repeatedly registering and re-registering his planes in far-flung countries, enabling him to avoid inspections and oversight. It also helped that Bout had the protection of the Russian government, enabling him to retreat to Moscow after global law enforcement agencies shined a spotlight on the work he had long been doing in the shadows. When the DEA and Pasquarello finally baited him by posing as Colombian rebels, they had him pinned against a wall, and they asked Bout, "Do you have anything to say?" Bout replied, "The game's over." This man was a clear danger to the world, and specifically America. Bout got out 6 years early. Now, you may remember that in previous shows I told you how George Soros-funded district attorneys have helped to cut various criminal sentences short, releasing them back into the public early. This happened with both Cleotha Abston, who murdered Eliza Fletcher in Memphis, as well as Ezekiel Kelly, who went on a lethal shooting spree in Memphis. When I raised this issue of why this was happening, the conclusion I drew was that district attorneys cut deals that allow violent criminals an early release. So what Biden did is release Victor Bout 6 years early, when he still has plenty of killing left in him. This is not a 103-year-old feeble man who wants to just die in peace. It was reported that Anthony Blinken had made the proposal to trade Bout for both Griner and Marine Paul Whelan, but the Kremlin rejected that proposal. And so the Biden administration went for Griner only.